And Sarah, you have the links for the live stream?
You mean for the YouTube? Yes.
Oh wait, I might have to, oh sorry, I'm gonna have to start the web. I'm gonna start the webinar.
Okay.
And Sarah, you have the links for the live stream?
You mean for the YouTube? Awesome. Hello, everybody. Welcome. All right. You should be good. How's it going, everybody? My name is Sarah Guffels. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes. I lead DevRel here at Sentry, and today we have two amazing folks joining us. We've got James and Alex, who I'll bring on shortly. But before we get started, if you have any questions or things that you're excited to hear about today, you can start letting us know in the chat. We've got a Zoom chat here for those of you who are joining there. We're also monitoring the YouTube chat if you happen to be on YouTube instead. So feel free to engage with us. Let us know where you're coming from, maybe. I'm coming from Washington State, a little outside of Redmond, which is where like the main Microsoft headquarters is. And it's coming from maybe. It's pretty beautiful today, just saying. We're having some good weather. From Dublin, Ireland, welcome. Welcome. I've never been to Ireland. I hear it's absolutely beautiful though. All right. Toronto, Seattle, awesome. Houston. We've got some good folks coming from all around the world. I love it. So you all are familiar with the chat now. Ecuador, Brazil, Israel, Amsterdam, Mexico. Awesome. Welcome. I have been to Glasgow, Scotland, Nigeria. Awesome. So you're familiar with the chat now, and feel free to keep putting where you're from. I love seeing just how many people from all around the world we have joining us. That is also where you'll ask questions. We did get a couple of questions ahead of time as well. So if you registered for the uh, for this event, then you were asked if you had any questions, so feel free to throw that in. And yeah, all right. So let's go ahead and get started now. Welcome, everybody. This is our second iteration of Behind the Code. We did some back-end experts last time, and today we're going to specifically be focusing on Laravel experts. Really excited about it today. As I mentioned, we have two amazing guests. I'll be the host. We've got James Brooks from Laravel, and we have Alex Buma, who is someone who's been working on like the Sentry Laravel SDKs, PHP SDKs for many years now. You might have registered seeing Michi was going to be joining us, who's one of our Sentry engineers as well. Unfortunately, he's sick. It happens, and we don't want sick people to be forced to work. So Alex graciously stepped in last minute to help with this event. So James and Alex, if you want to join me real quick, I'll do a quick introduction and let you all say hello. So as I mentioned, Alex is a freelance PHP maintainer for the Sentry SDKs, based in the Netherlands, working for Sentry for 8 to 9 years now. And James is an engineer team lead at Laravel, focusing on dev tools like Laravel Forge and Envoy. Did I pronounce that right, James?
Envoy.
Envoyer. I
Yeah,
mean, to be fair, you've
it's
got,
close enough.
yeah. He also organizes PHP Stoke, a quarterly meetup in Stoke-on-Trent. Is that right?
Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
very glamorous, but yeah.
Is that like a place in London or?
Yeah, no, it's the city that I live in the UK.
Oh,
Yeah.
got it. Got it. Okay. Okay. I did not know that. James is also the creator of the OSS status page system, Cache. That one I got right, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
And the Laravel Artisan cheat sheet. So really warm welcome to James and Alex. Do you have anything else to say to introduce yourselves, or?
No, that
No.
was a great introduction.
Awesome, awesome. All right. Just making sure the chat's okay. Why is everyone at the bottom of the screen? We will be turning off the slides in just a second. We're just doing a quick intro, and then it'll just be nice big faces so that you can all chat with everybody. Okay, so before we get started, I did want to do a super quick intro to Sentry for those of you who maybe aren't familiar. So you might know Sentry as a monitoring platform. And yes, this is true. We are a monitoring platform. We help you monitor all of your applications. We support over 100 languages and frameworks, front end, back end, mobile, gaming, LLMs, whatever you may be building. But monitoring also somewhat implies like a passiveness. And we are definitely focused much more on actionability and helping you be able to debug your systems. So giving you the right insights, context, and helping you prioritize issues so that you can quickly trace them and find the root causes and fix them fast. I like to say that debuggable systems are ones in which you have contextual and understanding of what the issues are, who they're affecting, on what types of devices, that you're able to leverage insights to prioritize whether or not this is an issue that you should focus on today or if it's something for next week. Because as we know, when we're building, there's going to be a number of issues, whether they are bugs or performance issues or just new opportunities to build new features. So being able to have the information you need to be able to prioritize and know what you should work on today is critical. And then also be able to trace your issues all the way down to the root cause. If you're at a larger company, you might be like a front-end engineer, and if the issue's spawning or, you know, the root of the issue is in the back end, you want to make sure that you are passing that off to the right team. And if you're a full stack engineer, you just don't want to waste time, you know, in one part of the code base when the issue is actually in a completely different part. So really, when we're thinking about Sentry, what we want you to be thinking about is providing that contextual awareness and that those insights to be able to contextualize, prioritize, and trace. Okay, that's the thank you side, and we're not doing that one yet. Stop sharing. That's my quick, short introduction to Sentry. If you have any questions about Sentry, please feel free to ask them in the chat. We'll be monitoring that as well. Okay, now on to the, you know, meat of this event. James and Alex, we have a couple questions that we've, you know, planned for, but again, we might be asking you questions from the chat. So James, I want to start with you. Laravel has grown immensely popular among professional developers. We've seen it all over social media. A lot of people now choosing to try it for the first time, and a lot of those folks who've been using it for many years, really excited about that. So how has the framework evolved in recent years to better serve large scale applications? And maybe specifically, I'm curious about like the performance related features and what is kind of on the horizon.
Yes. So I don't work on the framework too closely myself, so I'm not sure what is on the horizon there. I guess I'm as excited as everybody else is about that because I know the team will be cooking up something. But in terms of what we've done over the last couple of years, I think it was in 2021 we announced Laravel Octane, which is an alternative way of running your Laravel application through either Swool, Roadrunner, or now FrankenPHP. And you can scale applications way above what you might think of as a typical PHP application can take you. And it does that by keeping basically the entire framework in memory. And you might have to tweak your application slightly, but then you can see insane scale. And then we've also got Laravel Vapor that you mentioned. And that is a way to deploy applications to AWS. So we use Lambda in the background, which scales just outrageously far. And you compare that with Octane, which is a slightly different runner in Vapor, but then you can take your applications even further than before. So I think Laravel itself has tons of options, and you can really pick and choose how you want to deploy those. Yeah, in the scale you see and get from Laravel, and I think most of that as well is underpinned by PHP itself, right?
Yeah.
PHP 8 has got a lot quicker, a lot more performant than it has been in the
Yeah.
past, which obviously helps.
Definitely, definitely. I'm kind of curious, Alex, from your perspective, you've been working with Sentry on PHP related SDKs for many years now. How have you seen kind of the framework evolving, or, just all of these new features evolving, and the support of being able to build, the tool that supports Laravel developers?
Yeah, we've seen a massive increase in the amount of events the framework is emitting, which allows us to gain so much insights. PHP doesn't have any monkey patching features like Python might have, so we can't just replace a function, a random function in someone's application to profile it. So we need some kind of hook or some kind of information from the framework. And Laravel has always been excellent at that. And recently we also introduced a few events of our own to even improve upon that. So every year it get better, and we can monitor more features just right out of the box without any user intervention, which is awesome.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's something that's really interesting in general. As I mentioned in my super quick intro, Sentry's really focused. This has been true since its inception, but I think more recently we've kind of been acknowledging it and really leaning into it. We've been really focused on what we like to call, debuggable systems, or being able to just debug faster and more efficiently and more accurately. And I think, Alex, you just kind of touched on something in general, which is, the design of the framework and the focus of the framework, and adding features that allow other tools to better support developers, right? And James, I'm kind of curious from your perspective. Sentry obviously loves Laravel. We had like a blog post recently about our partnership and kind of how we like to work together. PHP has been a core of Sentry since the beginning. But I'm curious, kind of from your perspective, James, how do you all think about the developers that are using Laravel, beyond just kind of that building? So maybe thinking a little bit about the other tools that they might be using.
How do you mean? Sorry.
Yeah, sorry. So you mentioned, I think you mentioned a couple things like Octane and Vapor, allowing you to leverage AWS more effectively, right? And I think that Alex just mentioned a couple ways in which the framework has changed such that Sentry can now get more events so that we can better support Laravel developers. Are there other things that you all think about, or how much are you all thinking about kind of this idea of how do we design this framework such that it can work within the larger ecosystem that a developer is working in, so that they can more effectively, build what they're building?
Yeah, so I think Laravel's in a unique position there because it's not just a framework, it's a whole ecosystem. So aside from hosting platforms, debugging tools, Octane, we also have things like billing, admin dashboards, feature flagging. And I think because we build all of those things, Laravel is built in a way that facilitates us to do that, but also anybody could build it. We're not, I think at this point in Laravel's like lifespan, it's very rare that we have to change the framework to actually be able to build anything new, like any new packages. And I think that's really come down to the fact that we have built so many already, that we've added hooks, we've added these mechanisms in place that allow you to override and extend Laravel's behavior.
Yeah.
And that's always something that we're keen to do, is to facilitate people building those packages and ourselves building those. Yeah, we don't really have to do too much these days to let those things happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that's why, that's definitely the reason I would say why Sentry's so keen on partnering with you all in general. Because I think oftentimes we can get, as like engineers, we can get bought into a framework or a language and just kind of assume that's how things are done. And kind of limit ourselves to what's possible. And I think when you're looking at ecosystems, frameworks, languages, tools to help you build better, you really want to look at everything that they offer and not just kind of that individual, oh, I can get an alert that I've got an error. Great, that's what Sentry can do for me. Well, no, actually, it can be part of your entire debugging workflow. And I think exactly kind of as you're saying. And we got a question earlier through registration around making an operational skeleton for applications that they might want to build in the future using Laravel. It sounds like what you're saying is that the entire Laravel ecosystem already supports a lot of that. But do you have any advice for people who might want to create those types of things?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, Laravel has a very good starting application skeleton. We also have starter kits, Laravel, Breeze, Jetstream, and then they're built on separate packages as well, like Sanctum, which API authorization, and Fortify for authentication. And I think if you were to want to build a skeleton where you can just kind of pick up and things are already in, I would start by looking at those and maybe customizing them to suit your needs. If you're only ever building SaaS products, then you might want to include billing by default for your own application skeleton. But I think my number one piece of advice there is not to fight the framework's kind of standard way of doing things. You get a lot for free because of the skeleton and the way that things are structured. Lots of packages just expect things to work that way. We change it up every now and then where we see our own applications maybe growing in a way that we're not keen on. But yeah, I would always check out the default way, Laravel's default kits, and kind of go from there. And people do that as well. They publish like GitHub templates which already have lots of those packages installed by default, and you could just start a new template and you're good to go.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I shared some links in the chat and we'll add them to the YouTube description afterwards. I like this comment from chat. Laravel feels like home for a web developer. It has everything that you need to build a web app.
It
Definitely.
should be a new slogan for Laravel.
Right? I know. Screenshot that comment. Awesome. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about kind of this debugging approach. I know I keep kind of harping on that, but that's where we tend to spend too much of our time, maybe, especially considering our tools can help, right? I'm curious, Alex, do you have experience with, like how we better support or how we even use some of Sentry's key features like our distributed tracing, and maybe how other developers might be able to leverage distributed tracing to help pinpoint those root causes, particularly for performance bottlenecks, because I feel like when there's an error, it's a little bit easier to trace, but when there's a performance bottleneck, knowing exactly where that's coming from can be hard. And in general, like, even if it's something that you've built with Laravel, leveraging Sentry that isn't related, that's fine too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love the error tracking from Sentry, but personally, the performance features are that's where it's at. It gains so much insight, and especially with the new performance issues, or new as in they have been in a long time already. But being able to dig into or have Sentry tell me that there is, for example, a n+1 problem. Super easy to solve with Laravel. I'm probably missed an eager load somewhere. We probably all done that. But Sentry being able to just tell me, like, hey, I noticed this for you. Let's go fix it. And then being able to go into that issue and view exactly which requests are the cause of that. And maybe even distributed tracing, see where it's coming from. Is it coming from my front end? Is it coming from my queue jobs? Is it coming from another one of my microservices, if you're into that? And that's just awesome to know exactly where it's coming from, because sometimes an issue is not a real issue in the sense that it's so low prio, as in it triggers once a day. Yes, it should be fixed, maybe not today, but being able to see where it's coming from, how many people are actually hitting it, or having trouble with the performance, and being able to prioritize fixing issues based on that is that are for me the most important features of using Sentry actually.
Yeah, you touched on a couple things I want to follow up on. I was recently doing some more research on the shift from more monolith applications to this like very microservice heavy, design. But we're starting to see a shift back away from so many microservices. And I'm curious from both of your perspective, kind of how do you see that shift, within the Laravel community? So as an example, during my research, I found out that Amazon Prime Video is starting to shift away from microservices. And part of the reason is because it just, there's going to be performance costs, right? To every time you have to call a separate service. But then also it is just so much harder to figure out a root cause of a problem when it could be in, one of 100 different services you're calling, right? And so I'm just kind of curious from both kind of the ecosystem design of Laravel, but also just from a Laravel developer's perspective, like, are we seeing that being talked about at all, or do you have any advice for folks there?
I mean, I'm not sure how you are feeling about it, James, but I feel like in PHP we kind of missed the microservice train a bit, in a good way, as in especially in Laravel, as in I've seen a few people doing it, but if you're using Laravel, you're probably not doing microservices, and you're probably also way too cool to even start that. But I feel like it's a bit like that in Laravel, at least.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't aware that people had. I'll be honest, I was hoping, but I wasn't aware that people had started to go back. I love that we go full circle on these things, and we'll be back to microservices in 10 years. But
just wait like 5 more years, and then they'll pop up again.
Yeah, somebody will come along with, I've got this great idea. Let's distribute.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't, I guess, so I'm not familiar with maybe what other people have been doing, but in Laravel ourselves, we don't really use microservices. We have a couple of things that we do just have separate applications. So in Forge, for example, you can request a Let's Encrypt certificate. So we have a separate service that just handles that for servers, because we just have so many servers connecting to it. We don't want to just eat up all that web traffic for our actual service. To me, that makes sense to be a microservice. It's an independent standalone thing. It's very easy to know that, okay, it's certificate related. It is this one place. But yeah, we don't really use microservices. I think it's just doesn't make sense most of the time. Somebody's going to shout at me in the comments, I'm sure, but I think most people that have used it will soon realize that actually it's probably a bad idea as things start to grow. And there's definitely a use case, but even Prime are going back around to not using it. So I think that says a lot.
Yeah, I was hoping this is what you all would answer, because I think exactly you touched on it, James. I don't think it's that there isn't a place for microservices, right? I think it's more about I'm going to go on a quick, super fast tangent. What I love about AI starting to become usable in kind of the developer space is that it can hopefully allow us to get back to being engineers and not just coders. That's kind of the difference I've been thinking about. And I think you just described it exactly like that, James, right? Like, which is if it makes sense, like there is a reason why this should be a separate service, whether that's the web traffic, whether that's, because it requires more security, whatever it is. If there's a reason why, yes, of course, make that a separate service, right? But I think we get caught up in these trends where it's like, oh, let me just, call all of these services because I can. And then you're bloating your applications, you have errors you can't figure out. Some one service goes down, everything is messed up, and you just, it takes too long to fix it. So it's not that they're not useful, it's that like, let's take a moment to think about when it is. And I think, someone in the comments just mentioned that they have a microservices architecture with a Laravel application, and they really like it. And so, again, it's not that you can't, it's just, from what it sounds like, the way that you all are building Laravel is thinking about the entire developer experience and not just offering some language features, right?
I think it comes back to just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yes.
Which is a good way
It
of saying
depends.
many. Yeah, it depends. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, someone else mentioned Laravel has facades, traits, repositories, interfaces, etc. I don't think we really need a lot of microservices.
Yeah, there's many ways of splitting code out. We don't have to run everything on separate places. And that's why we ended up with GraphQL as well, right?
Yeah.
So.
Ooh, spicy.
Just gonna throw that out there.
Yeah, I love this take. I'm hesitant to say this, but I actually kind of like GraphQL, but yeah. But I can understand, as in there's a place for it. But again, it depends, as in there is a use case, but there's also a lot of wrong use. People are using it just because, instead of having an actual use case.
Yeah. It's true.
Yeah.
It's true.
Stop with the hot takes now, sorry.
No. I think it's great. I think that's exactly it though, right? Like there's never going to be a right or wrong to anything in tech. Like like I remember, 15 years ago when the conversation, and it still happens, right? But is like, oh, what programming language should you learn first? It's like there's no answer to that, right? It's pick one
The one
and
that solves
start
your
learning.
problem.
Yeah, exactly. The one that solves your problem. Okay, I do want to ask a little bit about like we've been talking a little bit around kind of queries and things like that. One of the questions that we got ahead of time was, are there best practices for debugging complex eloquent queries? And are there any hidden Laravel tools for query visualization? So maybe James, we'll start with you, but Alex, I'm also curious about kind of your experience with this.
Yeah, so Laravel provides, maybe not for visualizing queries necessarily, but we'll come back to that point if I remember. So Laravel has a couple of built-in helpers. So like you can do like I can't remember the exact name off the top of my head now, but it's like model prevent lazy loading or something. And then if you try and lazy load a relationship, it will just fire an exception. You can, I've seen in production, people then pair that with the lottery facade, which is basically just randomizing numbers. And then you can choose to log to Sentry and say, hey, we have a n+1 problem here, or with lazy loading. But you don't want to send every single time that happens, just kind of a nudge to remind you. And then typically, so I guess the other thing is that anytime you're querying a model, or even doing like a raw database query, you can append dump or DD, and you can get the entire query dumped out, which is very useful. So if you are familiar with writing SQL, whichever flavor you're using, you might just see that like, oh, that's a weird way of querying this data. Maybe if I was to write that myself, that's not how I would do it. I've done something wrong when I'm trying to fetch some data. The thing that I do want to point out is a tool by Tobias Petri. It's a plugin for, well, it's two parts. It's explainmysql.com. And then there's a Table Plus plugin paired with that. So you can explain a query that is particularly tricky, and it will tell you kind of how you can improve it. And explain MySQL by Tobias actually just breaks down like MySQL's very confusing explain output.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very useful tool.
Very
useful
confusing
tool. And
indeed.
yeah, that's helped us like so much using that tool. So yeah, I would check that out.
Oh my gosh, I really wish I knew about this ahead of time instead of just spending hours looking through my databases book trying to figure out.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Yeah. I'm curious, Alex, kind of your perspective on this.
No, as in excellent points, as in for the developer tooling, as in just throwing a DD out there and copy pasting your query to your own database tool and just running it with explain if you understand that, or using mysqlexplain.com or the Postgres version of that. It is super helpful, as in sometimes I've been debugging queries and I think why would this be slow, and just running an explain on it and just seeing makes sense, rewriting my my elegant query to match the new query is super helpful to fix those things. And of course you can always see those coming back in Sentry, because in the performance features you can see the queries. Sentry will also notify you of the slow queries. And exactly the prevent lazy loading, or the, I can't remember also what it is.
It's a very long
but
method name, yeah.
yeah, exactly. We've built in support inside the SDK for it, so you can just with one line you can enable it. It's not by default, but if you like that, you can do that, and that's super helpful to just get to the bottom of some really obscure performance issues.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
I
did
think
see
one
in the
of
comments as sorry.
no, go.
I was going to say somebody just reminded me of Laravel debug bar as well, which just kind of sits at the bottom of the site and will log any queries, let you see that output a lot quicker. Especially useful there is the runtime of those queries, because you could think they might not be running for that long, but actually it all adds up, especially if they're hidden behind like Ajax requests or something else.
Yeah.
I think they even added something. Yeah, they added a visual explain feature to the debug bar.
Amazing, so good.
A few weeks ago, or a month ago. Yeah, so they have a visual explain button, and I think it even links to mysqlexplain.com. Not entirely sure, but that's super helpful. As in, for in development, the debug bar is awesome. Yeah,
I love that. Yeah, I was gonna say, one thing that I just love in general when I'm like particularly with n+1 queries is in Sentry you can actually visualize that entire trace and see it also, right? And I think that
Yep.
just kind of like it's what I love about programming is it's all just layers of abstraction, right? And so whatever layer of abstraction works for you so that you can get the best information so you can continue forward is the one you go with, basically. Cool. I want to shift it a tiny bit towards, I mean, we've been talking about performance a lot, but I'm kind of curious in general. Have you all experienced like real world examples where performance optimizations have like significantly improved an application's responsiveness, or just like the user's experience? Like, you know, sometimes it can be slow, but a user doesn't really notice it because of the way that, you know, whatever application you're building. So, you know, mostly I'm thinking about how it might impact the user. But I'm curious, while working on Sentry, while working on the Laravel ecosystem, do you have any kind of real world examples of that?
I have an example of where it went wrong.
Oh, even better.
Which I think,
nice.
yeah, which might let's I'll tell the story. So this is on Laravel Forge. We've been working on some new features in the backend, mainly to kind of restructure how like resources belong to people. And we spent ages working on this. It's a bit of a paradigm shift in the backend. And then we tested it. We all tested it locally. It was great. We put it onto our staging environment where there's a few test servers. It's all fine. The day comes. We thought it would take like, I don't know, 5 minutes of downtime just to kind of run this migration. It took a lot longer for a start because there was way more data in production. And then, yeah, it finally ships. Everything's like launched. I go to my server's dashboard, and instead of taking about 70 milliseconds, it takes 7.5 seconds, which was definitely a moment of panic. And we were like, well, this makes no sense. Like everything, those queries, when we ran them locally, they're all saying they're optimized and whatever. And they were on small amounts of data, not when you've got hundreds of thousands of servers, sites, users, that kind of thing. So we're trying to do some debugging live before we turn the site back on again. And it's like these queries are just really slow in production. There is nothing we can do quickly to remedy that. So we have to roll everything back. And then I guess all of that is to say that even we make mistakes. And what we did was kind of take like a bit of a dump of production data, like anonymized data, so that we had the same amount of records, so that we knew that whatever changes we make, production level data it's going to work. So I think even with all the best tooling, you still need to actually test it on that amount of data that you anticipate. I think that's doable for something like this, where we have hundreds of thousands or millions of records. But if you're like an analytics company where you've got billions or trillions of records, bit trickier. But yeah, definitely try seeding data, a lot more data than you anticipate.
Yeah, for sure. As in, that has bitten me in the past too. As in, works great on staging, works great locally, and then you push it to production, and all hell breaks loose. Because indeed, the optimizer is like, I ain't doing that with that many rows. As in, that's never gonna work.
Yeah.
But yeah, as in with 3 users, everything is fast. With a few thousand, maybe not.
Yeah, it's true. I there's a gentleman in Toronto, Henri. He goes by Henri Helvetica online. And he talks a lot about performance, and he's a huge proponent of like Rum Data, right? And just kind of making sure that you aren't living in this, tiny little box thinking that everything is fine because you're on your high-powered network with your really big machine and, and it works for you. I know the joke of it works on my machine, but sometimes we even think about like we miss the fact that, oh, well, it worked in staging, so it's fine. Yeah, I think leveraging that data is real data as much as you
Yeah.
can.
Yeah, that's what I also like about where Sentry puts a big focus on that, as in it's production data, as in it's not just data, it's actual production data.
Yep.
As in so many issues that were never found on development or on the staging or even on some public previews that will definitely be found by real users, and they will not tell you. And if they will tell you, they
it's
will.
Broken.
Yeah, it be broken. Yeah, sure.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, cool, bro.
Yeah,
that's one of my.
That's one of my favorite features of Sentry is like the PR comments, where if you if you have GitHub integrated with Sentry and you open up a PR that touches a file that is known to be a part of an issue, right? Like we've done the analysis, we suspect that a commit involving that file was the cause of this issue. We'll leave a comment there and be like, hey, just so you know, you're touching this code. There's a bunch of open issues related to it. Maybe try fixing those. I mean, we don't say that part. That's just Sarah. But but I think but it is that, right? Like if ideally you are able to test this prior to shipping, so then that way you don't have to rely on real users running into these issues. But when it's going to happen. So when it does, if you can fix it as quickly as possible and kind of get all of that awareness as quickly as possible, I think it's critical.
Yeah, the Sentry comments on pull requests has been like such a huge help for us, because it's almost impossible to stay on top of that watching through the list of like issues. But as soon as you've deployed something and you're like, that's broken, you know exactly where to look, you know what's limited it down. Yeah, very helpful feature.
And not to be too sneaky, but definitely check out GitHub Universe next week, because there might be some improvements coming there as well.
Ooh.
Heard it here first.
We've gotten a couple of questions in the Q&A I want to address. A couple of folks are asking about kind of the best learning path to get up to speed, wanting to use Sentry and Laravel, or tips and tricks for having kind of getting the best information out of like performance, like analyses for Laravel with Sentry. I'm curious if either of you have any advice there. I can chime in as well, but.
I think this is an Alex question.
Yeah, I figured as much. As in, the best thing is to just start. As in, that sounds a bit cheesy, maybe, but just installing the SDK, following the getting started guide. As in, it will take you like a minute, maybe 5, and having that data in Sentry and just seeing what comes up. As in, Sentry is really good in making sense of the data itself already. So it will be performance issues like slow queries, N+1 issues, and a bunch of other automatic performance related issues, apart from just regular exceptions, which it of course will also track. But that's also already immensely helpful. And once you see those, you kind of figure out the UI by just digging into those issues, and I think you'll quickly catch on where to actually go inside the UI to find your own issues and to figure it out. And of course, the docs are always a great starting place. There's a lot of thought put into that, of helping you getting started with the performance monitoring.
Yeah, that's basically what I was going to say is, Sentry is most useful when you have actual users, but not just because I work for Sentry, but because as an engineer, when I think about kind of building a new application, I want to make sure that I have my rail guards in place from the beginning, right? So installing
Yes.
Sentry from the beginning, even in development, sometimes I'm like, oh, I didn't realize I had an error there. Thanks, Sentry. Like, that's helpful, right? When I'm just kind of like testing it, even locally, right? Because you can have a development build and even if you're just like testing on local hosts, you can actually get things captured in Sentry. So I think it really is just about starting with Laravel. I think someone in the comments mentioned Laracast is a good resource for learning some Laravel stuff. But yeah, getting started, actually just building something. As Alex mentioned, installing Sentry can take 5 minutes, maybe. It's pretty quick. And then as you start to use it, you can see, okay, I want alerts for this. Oh, I want, to track this specifically, whatever it might be. Yeah, it's hard when the answer is like kind of a non-answer, like just start, just try it out. But I do think that's part of it, right?
I think something else that often goes overlooked is that you can fill Sentry with too much as well. So something that we've been doing recently in Forge is to actually pull out some of the exceptions that we don't care about.
Yeah.
Like things that just happen in life, like an API endpoint that like it doesn't really matter if it fails, but whatever. And you can obviously snooze those and see if it starts escalating. But also sometimes we just don't want to know about that particular error. So yeah, there's like a Laravel's exception handler has like a don't report list. You can add some exceptions to there, and then that keeps the noise out, and you can focus on the errors that actually matter to you as well. At like a rudimentary level, and then you can obviously go into Sentry and archive things, snooze them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We had a question in general around kind of how, because Laravel is so fully featured, there's obviously going to be things that help you with debugging, like logs. And then Sentry is, fully featured on that monitoring, debugging, space. What are the best ways to kind of leverage both so that people aren't spending too much time trying to dig through logs when Sentry could have easily just given them, the answer, or like you said, sending too much to Sentry and having it become, unusable because you're just throwing everything over there. Do y'all have any advice kind of on how to leverage both of them?
Yeah, I think an important thing is to have Sentry have enough context so you don't hopefully need your logs. As in, logs are always useful, of course, for actually digging in, but getting access to the logs and it is sometimes hard. But for example, just using Laravel 11 introduced context, and you can set just values in a context, and Sentry will pick those up. So when an exception occurs, it will also show that context, or for performance issues will also show that context. So just knowing, I don't know, which user, which type of server for Forge, for example, which type of API provider is being interacted with, those kind of things can be already super useful to give you enough context to either replicate the issue locally or replicate it in production on your test account, for example. That's super helpful. That's also maybe a good one. I think I saw that question also in the Q&A, that sometimes Sentry misses variables, as in it shows the stack trace, but it doesn't have variables. The default PHP installation on Ubuntu servers and maybe other Linux distributions also, they have a PHP ini flag enabled or disabled that removes variables from the exception stack trace. So that's why we can't capture them, as in we mentioned it in the docs, but it's a largely overlooked feature. If you just switch that around on your server, it might also really help to see the variables that are being passed to a function, for example, to know what is being passed in and why it might fail there.
Yeah. And I would say also, if you do have questions about, using Sentry with your Laravel applications, we do have a Discord. I just threw it in the chat. It's down in the description below as well. Feel free to jump in and ask some questions. We're always there to help. I think there was another question going back to kind of the Rum data, the production level data. Someone asked, when your production application has a bug that can make your data have an anomaly while in production, how do you fix it? So you didn't catch it prior to shipping or prior to deploying. What is your recommendation? Is it to just roll back? Is it something else?
I guess it's one of those again. It depends, right? It depends what the bug is.
Yeah.
It might be something tiny that just has like a small impact to a couple of users because it's like a little unused feature or something. Or it could be catastrophic, like in our case. I think you just have to weigh that up as an engineer, if or product manager or whatever your role might be. Are we happy to live with this until we're able to fix it? That fix could take us 5 minutes. It could take us 5 days. Yeah, it's really sorry for the non-answer again, but it really does depend.
I think it's also. Oh, go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, it's also really important to figure out if the data can be recovered just by the other data in your database, for example. As in, I've had a few issues in the past few weeks where some data got corrupted or it got into some invalid state, but we were able to write some commands to backfill the data, basically, or make it the correct state again. So the bug was there and it was happening still, but in a really small percentage of users. So we figured we'll leave it in, we'll fix it, and afterwards we'll fix the data with a command, just run it once and fix up the data. That's also really one important one, as in, do you need to roll back because it's actively corrupting a lot of data and I will never be able to recover that? Or as James said, we can live with it for a few hours or days that it takes us to fix it and roll the fix. Rolling back is sometimes even more harmful than doing good in some cases. Especially if you need to go back to a backup from a few hours old, that can be really bad.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think in general it kind of goes back to start using all of the features that Laravel offers that makes sense for your application, not just all of them because, right? Start using Sentry and see, what questions do you still have? What issues do you run into? Ask questions. So you can go on to the various GitHub repositories for both Laravel and Sentry. You can go into Discord. Ask those questions, get advice for your specific instance. But I think one of my biggest takeaways from this whole conversation is that the Sentry team, the Laravel team, we're all very focused on trying to make that developer experience rich and supported. And so there's likely going to be something that between the two of us, right, we've thought about. We have some kind of instrumentation or some kind of tool to be able to support you. So it's really just about finding what your unique workflow is, how your team works specifically, the needs of your application. If you are running something that is mission critical, like lives could be affected, yes, maybe you do want to roll back because not having that new feature is much better than having it incorrectly, right? But if you're just doing, some face tuning app or something, then like maybe it's not as important and it's fine.
A very specific example, that.
I don't even know where that came from. I think it's because I was trying to find the background thing for my green screen in Zoom, and it said like face tuning, and I'm like, I don't need that. What are you talking about? I swear this is me. Awesome. We only have about 10 minutes left. I do want to get into a couple of the other questions, but I just want to make sure we kind of recognize that time check. I'm kind of curious in general. I'm clearly fangirling over here about Laravel and kind of all of the support it has. But someone did ask this ahead of time. This is not staged. Outside of the developer experience, which they said was truly great, what would you say, James, is Laravel's like biggest pull versus competitors? So like, in what scenario does Laravel shine where others might struggle? And again, like we've talked a lot about that developer experience. So, if you have other things as well.
Yeah, so I think that's like a multi-layered question and answer, really. If we're talking about frameworks in general, then you get a lot for free with Laravel. You get a queue system, internationalization. I'm sure I said that wrong still. Validation, command line tools. And that's like just all framework level things. That's not to mention all the open source packages it comes with. It's a really good developer experience across every PHP framework, at least, I would say. Obviously, I am biased, but I have still worked with many frameworks. And the thing that drew me to Laravel was how easy everything looked. I think just writing code, it just feels natural through Laravel. But also the documentation. We put a lot of time, effort, and energy into writing best-in-class documentation. And ultimately, that's what drew me to Laravel all those years ago, was just like everything was written down in a way that I could understand. Dum over here could read it and be like, I understand how I would make this CRM that I was building, how what represents a model and how that's related, and like how all of those things are just structured. It just made so much sense, and the documentation did a really good job of that. And I think even like now, all these years later, we're putting out things like the Laravel Bootcamp, which shows you how to take a brand new Laravel project to having like a Twitter clone that shows you that works in React, Livewire, Vue. You could choose your own adventure. And I think that's just a testament to how much energy and effort and time we put in sweating those details. Hopefully that answers it.
That's absolutely also what drew me to Laravel in the Laravel 3 days, even, as in it's just spelled out, as in this is a model, this is how you use it, as in some other frameworks, they sometimes beat a bit around the bush, as in it's more technical documentation than developer documentation, if that makes sense. As in they greatly explain how all the bits and bobs work, but not how you are supposed to use it or how it's intended to be used. And Laravel has many opinions on that, which is great for getting started. But it's also being able to be flexible. So if you want to deviate from it, you can. But it has an opinion which you can follow to make excellent application. That's one of the strengths from my point of view, at least.
Yeah. Well, we're coming towards the end. We did have a somewhat controversial question, James, that was submitted ahead of time. I'll say one word, WordPress. You want to say like we've got like 1 minute. So you want to say like 1 minute on it?
I think, I mean, there's a lot to say, but I think everyone needs to just remember that WordPress is super important to the success of PHP. Even when PHP has been looked down on, and WordPress has been looked down on as well, in many ways, but it's what has built so much of PHP's foundation. It's driven PHP forward, and so many websites are undeniably built on WordPress that, it's hard to argue its impact otherwise. I would say that WordPress is incredibly important to the community, and that I really hope it can all be resolved and we can kind of get back onto the same path again. I would also like to take a moment, though, just to shout out Statamic, which is a CMS built on Laravel. It's been around pre-Laravel days as well, actually. So if you are looking to move, I'm not affiliated with Statamic. I'm just putting it out there. It's Laravel, built on Laravel. Yeah, it's well worth checking out.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to thank you. I appreciate you chatting a little bit about that. I'm going to throw up this one slide just so then that way folks can see some links. But as we're kind of ending this, I did want to ask each of you to share what you think every developer should do today to improve their Laravel expertise, and not just kind of like becoming a Laravel expert, but building the best applications with Laravel. James, we'll start with you.
Okay, I have 3 things that come straight to mind. One is to get yourself a Laracast subscription. It's like the best value for money. 2 is to really look at the community that Laravel's built. We're building things, well, I say we, I can't take any credit for it. The community are building things like Livewire, Laravel Herd that we partnershiped with. Like, there's so many things that are just amazing in the community, and so much to be learned from other people just trying things. And then to go back to the bootcamp, I think every Laravel developer that hasn't already gone through that should absolutely check it out. I know senior Laravel developers who started with Laravel many years ago, new things have been added, but there was one way of doing something then, there's a new way of doing it now. And so many people have gone through the bootcamp, which only takes a couple of hours, and come out with so much more knowledge about some of the more modern and newer Laravel features.
Yeah, and definitely check out once you're done with the bootcamp, the getting started guide for Sentry, and just set it up, as in just set it up, put it on the background, as in it will provide useful information for your application and allow you to fix your bugs, even performance issues. That's also a great addition, if I may.
No, appreciate it. Awesome. I think, I think I've answered a lot of the questions here. We still had a couple more. It seems like there's a lot of interest in this conversation, so maybe we can do it again sometime. But we left a couple of links here on the screen for you all. On some of the partnerships like Sentry with Laravel, Forge, and Vapor. There's a sign up for Sentry link here. And then as Alex was mentioning, kind of the getting started with Sentry for Laravel. Laravel has all the support we got as a Q&A question. So definitely agree here. Also, just to mention, there was a question about kind of, Sentry teams and things like that. So yeah, so Sentry, we offer a number of different plans that will grow with you. So whether you are an indie developer just getting started, we have a free plan for you, all the way through if you're, Disney, building Disney Plus. So as you are growing your team or your application, Sentry will grow with you. We even have a self-hosted version because we are fair source. Speaking of which, if you haven't already seen the OSS pledge at osspledge.com, highly encourage you to check it out. We are encouraging every company that uses anything open source within to build their tooling or their applications or their frameworks to give back to those open source maintainers, because without them, we couldn't do what we're doing. So check out osspledge.com for more information and encourage your companies to participate. I want to thank you both, James and Alex. This has been an incredible conversation. I think we've had just a lot of great advice and also showing off just kind of how fully featured both Laravel and Sentry is to be able to support that developer experience and that developer workflow. So thank you so much for taking the time today.
No worries.
Thank
Thanks
you
for having me.
All right. If you all have any other questions, feel free to add in the comments on YouTube, reach out to us on any of the socials, join our Discord. We have all of that here. And thank you so